So in this video, I'm going to highlight some of the shows that I grew up with as a kid. Now, I'm not going to go into great detail on any of these shows because this is the second time that I've recorded the video, and literally before starting this recording, I checked, and the first take was 45 minutes. So I don't want to make a video that long, so I'm going to make this quick. If anybody's curious about the shows that I'm going to highlight, feel free to go to Wikipedia. All the information is there. So we're going to start with PBS, and I still watch PBS to this day. In fact, to be honest, aside from some of the retro cartoons that I'm going to highlight later that are shown on Boomerang, PBS is really all I watch. Particularly, I watch the NewsHour and Charlie Rose. So, as far as the PBS shows I grew up with, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Nowadays, unfortunately, Mr. Rogers has been gone since 2003. He will be sorely missed. I loved the guy. His legacy lives on in Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, which is an animated show that centers very much around the same principles. It takes place in the neighborhood of make-believe versus Mr. Rogers, who you'd be in his house and then he would segue into it. And he would have Mr. Rogers have different segments like Mr. McFeely and whatnot. Like I said, if you want to take a look at more of the show, feel free to search for episodes here on YouTube. They've actually got episodes here on YouTube, and to be honest, it's really taken me down memory lane. Sesame Street, same deal. What I find interesting about the show today is the fact that it's still going. 20 plus years, and it's still going. Still going. This show was... for those of you in the United Kingdom, you're probably familiar with and who are my age, you're probably familiar with the original episodes of Thomas the Tank Engine. We didn't get those directly as you did over here in the United States. Instead, what they did was they developed this show called Shining Time Station and built episodes of the show around the theme that certain Thomas episodes were about, or vice versa. They would build an episode regarding a particular theme and have the Thomas story to match. The takeaway from this show, for me, was my introduction to George Carlin. Now, the original series featured Ringo Starr as Mr. Conductor. I ask again, for those of you who are in the United Kingdom, if you remember Ringo Starr narrating the original shows, the original episodes of Thomas, well, in order for that to work, he signed a contract. Ringo Starr signed a contract and played Mr. Conductor. He was edited in as a 6-inch tall doll wearing a conductor's uniform, and he would teach the kids about various moral values and whatnot, and also get into some antics. Later on, he was replaced by George Carlin, and George Carlin, I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't know George Carlin was a sailor comedian, and when I say sailor, I'm talking about the language that he used. Until, honestly, only several years ago, not long before he died. But growing up, I never knew he was like that. I always knew him as Mr. Conductor. You can take a look. People have uploaded episodes of the show on YouTube as well. I did grow up with Barney. Don't judge. The trivia that is interesting about this show nowadays is the fact that, well, two things. Number one is I understand that the creator of the show kind of regrets what she's done. I don't know all the details, but as I understand it, it was something I think, and I stress the think, Something about always having children unconditionally obey their elders. And I think that was where things that's where she felt that things didn't, she looks back on it and... Ugh. The other interesting little tidbit, as I understand it, is one of the people who portrayed Barney in the suit was fired. Not the voice actor, but the person in the suit was fired for cursing on the set in front of the kids. As I got older, junior high age, Bill Nye the Science Guy. People that are my age grew up most likely having Bill Nye in their science classrooms. I've got 2 videos of him myself. These days he's CEO of the Planetary Society, and he encourages people to go out and explore science. But back in the day, his show was just awesome. He would take science and make it approachable to anybody. Obviously he was going for kids, but it was such a fun show. It was wacky, comedic, and very, very educational. I loved the show. A little interesting piece of trivia. I already told you that he's the CEO of the Planetary Society. If you search for the channel Big Think on YouTube, you can search for Tuesdays with Bill. Nowadays, he takes questions from people and he'll answer them on the Tuesdays with Bill segment. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful show now. And back then, it was a wonderful, wonderful program. Bill Nye was actually so popular that when, I think it was Universal, made a Back to the Future miniseries, Christopher Lloyd had returned to portray his role as Doc Brown, scientist Doc Brown. In that show, they actually had Bill Nye showing the kids how to do things. Now Christopher Lloyd was narrating, but Bill was the one actually performing the various experiments that they could try at home based around a central theme of the show. So as far as Bill's own show was concerned, I'm wondering if he's still used in classrooms today. Because I loved the guy. Magic School Bus. I don't know. I can't remember how long that lasted on PBS. I remember when I first saw it, it was on PBS. I think it was bought out by a corporate entity because, or I'm not sure why, but like I said, you go to Wikipedia, you can get all the information there, but you can also search for episodes here on YouTube. Just wonderful nostalgia. I would come home and just park myself down and just watch. Loved it. We're going to get away from PBS, and we're going to go over to Fox Kids. This show, honestly, is no longer around. I think you might be able to find something on YouTube and, again, Wikipedia. But it's called Eeek the Cat. A couple of characters I remember from this show were obviously Eeek. There was also Sharky the Shark Dog, some elk, I can't remember who he was. And then there was a side show about these 2 cavemen, but the problem is I can't remember if that was on Eeek the Cat or if that was on Tasmania, sort of a spin-off series of where Taz, the Tasmanian Devil from Looney Tunes, was the main character in it, and he had a family and whatnot. Another show I grew up with was Bobby's World, centered around the antics of this young lad. One of the gags in the show was everybody would mispronounce his last name as opposed to the actual term generic. The kid's last name was generic. So, and he also, like I said, Wikipedia can tell you all about it, but my memories of him are around Uncle Ted and Captain Squash. This needs no introduction. The original Power Rangers. Now, a little piece of trivia. Some of you may know that the original Power Rangers are coming back next year, but it's not quite what you might think. They're actually looking, from what I understand it, at basing it around a theme that would resonate to the audiences of the original show who are now older. So as opposed to the teenagers with attitude being productive and wonderful, perfect citizens, this time around when they say attitude, they mean it. The characters are on the last leg of high school, about to be dropping out, about to flunk, things like that. It's going to be interesting to see what they do. A couple of spin-off shows from the original Power Rangers were popular back then, Saban's VR Troopers, and the interesting thing about that is, back in the 90s when the show was popular, VR was there, but it wasn't. I mean, it existed, but the technology wasn't there to make it a worthwhile experience. Fast forward 20 years, and here we have it, you know? But I remember, one of the characters I remember was that talking dog, Jake. Like I said, you can search YouTube for episodes and Wikipedia to find out more. Another similar spin-off was Big Bad Beetleborgs, and unlike the Power Rangers, they used teenagers. Big Bad Beetleborgs actually used kids, and unlike the Power Rangers who learned as they went along, the kids were basically masters of the comic book that their superheroes came out of, and they basically knew what was what. You know, they remembered everything from the comics, so you know, it was an attempt to basically garner more money. Same thing with Masked Rider. Masked Rider, similar premise. The only difference is this guy was from another planet and he came to protect Earth from Count Dragon. Interesting piece of trivia about this. Masked Rider is the only program in which, that I know, that has crossed over with the original Power Rangers. The Power Rangers are sent to... I said Miranoi. I'm sorry, I goofed. It was Edenoi. And the Rangers are sent to aid Masked Rider, who at first doesn't really... He thinks they're Count Dragon's minions, but then, you know, he reveals them. The Rangers reveal themselves, and they all team up and, you know, save the day kind of thing. But I think that crossover was primarily meant to promote the show. We're going to get in now to Cartoon Network. A lot of these shows I'm not going to go over because they are still syndicating these days. You can take a look at them on Boomerang. We've got Dexter's Lab, Cow and Chicken, I Am Weasel, which did become its own show for a short while. I don't think that really worked out too well because it wasn't around for very long. The original Powerpuff Girls, and I'm not talking about the reboot. Again, I stress the original Powerpuff Girls, okay? Okay. This show does air from time to time, but I haven't seen it in a while on Boomerang. It's called Two Stupid Dogs. And within that, you've got Secret Squirrel. And this is not the 1970s Secret Squirrel, okay? This is the sort of a rebirth, if you will. Then you got this lad, Johnny Bravo. If you take, I would say, the stupidest person in the world and fit him with a six-pack, a super muscular bod, and the ego the size of the planet, that's the guy. He's a complete doofus. But I loved watching that show. Flintstones, Jetsons, and those are all for the regular Cartoon Network shows. The rest of this, the rest of the Cartoon Network's programming is actually part of the Toonami block. And Toonami, for those of you who do not know, was Cartoon Network's branch off into Japanese anime that was adapted to the US market. There were two shows that I grew up with Toonami. Sailor Moon. I just loved the focus on how you know, girls can be successful, how women can be successful, and showing that they didn't have to listen to, they didn't have to be put down by guys. And you have to understand, we're talking early, mid, late 90s, okay? This was, and it was re-syndicated on the Toonami block in 2000, but the show was really big as far as the social issues explored at the time. My favorite scout is honestly Mercury because of her mind. The other show that I watched from the anime world was Tenchi Muyo, part of the Tenchi Muyo universe. Specifically, what I watched was Tenchi Universe and Tenchi in Tokyo. Of the two, I liked Tenchi in Tokyo because around then I was starting to get interested in the opposite gender, and as a result, I really took to the romance and the drama of the show, in addition to the comedy. But I think what won me over was the romance quality of it. And now we're going to get into the 1990s Nickelodeon. Not the modern day Nickelodeon, but the Nickelodeon when I was growing up. Rugrats. Loved the show. Angelica was an absolute brat. They had the show rehashed as all grown up with the kids as teenagers, which is an interesting premise. Thinking back on the show, though, I do think that Angelica needed some serious psychological help. Both of her parents were executives, and they weren't home very much. So you can see what that can do to a kid. But she needed serious help. Angry Beavers. You got Norbert, who's the one who is of sound mind, and you got Daggett, who's willing to go and get his nose caught and everything. You put the two personalities together, and what do you got? Craziness. Hey Arnold. It was about this show. The show was about this one character. His name is Arnold. We never know what his last name is. But he had a football-shaped head, and it had to do with his, basically just him growing up as a young lad. He had a friend named Gerald. He also had, there were other characters like the people living in the boarding house. Just a crazy, crazy mix of people. Oh, and he has a pet. He had a pet pig named Abner. I have to say that when I saw the show, I thought the idea of having a pet pig. Now, again, we're talking 90s, okay? I thought the idea of having a pet pig was very strange. KaBlam was basically a skit comedy show. And we had things like Action League Now, Prometheus and Bob, and Angela Anaconda. Angela Anaconda, for some really stupid and unknown reason, became its own show, which didn't make sense to me. Legends of the Hidden Temple. Legends of the Hidden Temple was really nice because it was based on actual events that happened and the legends surrounding said events. The kids would be asked to answer questions about the legend, and then have to work on physical challenges related to it that would be based on the. I mean, obviously, obviously they can't do what was done in the legend, but okay. So basically, what they did was like if there were secret letters, for instance, if the legend talked of a secret letter, they would have to retrieve their own quote-unquote secret letters. So it was just a fun game show, but it was intense, as I understand it, for those that were actually involved in the production, particularly the kids. There's a YouTube video where the host talks about filming on the show, and he said that at one point, one kid actually got sick, and they had to halt production for the day. So that was rough. Figure It Out. We had a panel who would answer questions about a contestant. And the one thing, and these were Nickelodeon celebrities answering questions about guests, okay? And the one guest that really stood out to me, and this was the original Figure It Out with Summer Sanders, was this one girl who could actually hold a pencil between her shoulder blades. Now that I loved. That was like, wow. And like I said, this is back in '90s, early 2000s. So, you know, wonderful, wonderful time. I often wonder what happened to the people on those shows, particularly the contestants. I wonder where they all are now. Obviously, Other's not a television network, but except for one show that I'm going to highlight, the rest of these I don't remember what network they were on because I watched them before you had the network logo in the bottom corner of the TV, before the TV rating system came in. So we're talking way young here. We have Jeopardy! And I remember, like, I'll still watch Jeopardy! To this day on occasion if I bump into it. I don't really keep up with the schedule. Like I said, the ones that I actively keep up with the schedule on are the retro cartoons and anything interesting on PBS. But as far as Jeopardy! Is concerned, I did watch it growing up. And I did enjoy it. I think the one time that I watched intently was when they had one contestant on who was totally blind, and I think he won. So that was a real stick-out moment for me. I honestly like Wheel of Fortune even more, because I enjoy those puzzle games. And just trying to solve those puzzles was just great fun. I had a PC game of Wheel of Fortune, and I had a handheld game of Wheel of Fortune. Actually, it was my brother's, but we both played it. So, speaking of game shows, this is the one show that I do know was on Game Show Network. This was shortly after we got cable. This is not a very well-known game show. It's called Inquisition. The Inquisitor was honestly ruthless. He was very ruthless. Like I said, go onto Wikipedia, find out more about the show. But the one thing that nobody ever found out was who the Inquisitor was. But it was a show that challenged your mind, and I always enjoyed and still enjoy to this day shows that challenge your mind, that educate your mind. Those are my favorite kinds of TV programs. This needs no introduction. Star Trek The Next Generation, I grew up watching that. Just loved it. The original Peanuts series, I had a couple of videos. One video I remember was where Chuck, Peppermint Patty, and Marcy all went to a bowling tournament. And they are nearing the end, and Chuck throws his ball, and he says, "Did I do it? Did I get a strike? Did I win?" And Peppermint Patty says, "You threw the ball out the front door, Chuck." Next thing you know, Linus and Sally are in the pumpkin patch with Snoopy awaiting the Great Pumpkin. You hear this rumble? Bam! Linus thinks it's the Great Pumpkin, but what it really was Charlie Brown's bowling ball. Garfield and Friends. If you have a Hulu subscription, they have Garfield and Friends on Hulu. It used to stream on Amazon Prime, but I think they ended up losing the rights to it. Excuse me. Or something along those lines. But I remember fond memories with the show. Binky the Clown was obnoxious. The sideshow that they had, U.S. Acres, Roy Rooster was just, ugh. He was mean. And Wade Duck, I loved Wade. He was afraid of his own shadow. That's what made him fun. The final two shows I'm going to highlight are Sonic the Hedgehog, Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, which was a very light-hearted, sort of comedic program. And this was back in the day when, in order to appeal to the parents of the kids who would watch the show, you had to have something educational at the end. So they would have this Sonic Says segment instilling a moral value. For instance, only call 911 when you absolutely must. Smoking is bad for you. Eat right, exercise, you know, those kinds of things. So it was good. It was very, very good. Just a fun little comedic show. Then we have Sonic the Hedgehog, better known as Sonic Sat-Am, standing for Saturday AM, which is to say the Saturday morning Sonic. Totally different world. Instead of miniature adventures, it was centered around a plot for Sonic and his group to find Princess Sally Acorn's father, who's the king, while at the same time stopping Dr. Robotnik and Snively. Like I said, go to Wikipedia for more. But those are the kinds of shows that I grew up with. Like I said, some of them are available today, still streaming. Some are available on YouTube. Some are still, like I said, they're still actually in active production. So it's interesting to see how things have changed over the last 20 years. Thank you for watching. Comments are welcome, and have a nice day.